Thanks to everybody who's joined, including my wife, who's consented to join, and she watched Bang the Drum Slowly, the movie, with me recently, and enjoyed it.
Ah.
And we're going to tonight talk about the Mark Harris novel, Bang the Drum Slowly, the movie that was made in '73, I believe, based on it, and is pretty faithful to it, as well as probably the U.S. Steel TV production, hour-long TV production in the 50s, I think 56, as well as probably stray references to the other three novels in the Harris Quartet, and probably a lot of other things we shouldn't talk about. Jeff Wattrick, friend of mine in Detroit, actually in Grosse Pointe, but we forgive him for that. In Grosse Pointe, Michigan, is going to be our discussion leader. So if you got any questions, stick up your hands or unmute yourself and try to butt in. Jeff's going to give us a brief summary, I think, to lead in. Is that right, Jeff?
Let me unmute myself first. Hello, everyone. Sure. So brief summary, obviously, Bang the Drum Slowly by Mark Harris. The book was followed by the, I guess you would call it a TV play from the early era of TV with Paul Newman as Henry Wiggen, and then the film in 1973 with Michael Moriarty and Robert De Niro. Gary was talking before the meeting started, a reference in I guess a index or something of baseball literature referred to it as a baseball player helps his friend die. Which is a really brief, very brief and economical way of describing the book and the story. But obviously, the conceit of the book, of course, is that it's a first-person memoir by Henry Wiggen, telling the story of the season that his roommate and backup catcher Bruce Pearson succumbs to Hodgkin's disease, and the gist of the story, right, is the team was pretty fractured at the beginning of the story, but they were probably the best team in the league. And slowly, as the rest of the roster learns of Bruce's predicament, they all kind of rally around him, and that generates I guess the clubhouse culture needed to carry them to the World Series. And as the book ends, you know, that they win the World Series, and then a few weeks later, Bruce passes away. So that's the gist of the story. It is one of my favorite baseball novels, the whole Henry Wiggen quartet. I read them first in high school, and I think I've read through all four of them 3 times in total. I've also read some other Mark Harris books. I think he's kind of one of those underrated or forgotten mid-century writers that you don't see too many guys like that anymore. So anyway, my thought on how to do this is that we'll throw out some topics and open it up to the floor, if that works for everyone, to talk about this as you guys see fit. And I think to start with the as Gary mentions, the book and the film are pretty similar. The movie is faithful to the pacing and the story of the book. Does anyone have a preference between the 3 versions as a favorite? Do you prefer the book over the film? Does anyone have any great love for the TV play?
Well, since I'm running the meeting, I'm going to speak up. I wasn't real keen on the U.S. Steel Hour. Rod Nelson said something out saying it was the best version ever or something. I thought that partly to compress it to an hour-ish, and partly to have it on a stage, you know, with 1 or 2 cameras, just really made it seem flat to me. And to me, the book and the movie is so faithful to the book, I consider them the same. You know, as far as batting 1,000 in baseball cliches, I think both the book and the movie are first rate. Unlike when I watched Field of Dreams, I didn't count the cliches and then just drift off to sleep I actually enjoyed them this time. The only one they didn't use that I wish they had is that somebody wasn't putting their pants on one leg at a time.
Yeah, I guess we can save that for the Bull Durham discussion.
So anyone else? We're going to vote.
Well, the book, of course, was 3 books. He did the trilogy with something for a seamstress, and I think I've read them all, but I was probably taken. They had me on the opening of the 1973 movie of the 2 guys jogging around the warning track of the pre-renovated Yankee Stadium to the streets of Laredo, which was Bang the Drum Slowly. That just drew me in like nothing.
Right, I agree. That was a really effective opening. And while De Niro doesn't look like a major league catcher, Wiggen did look like a pitcher running laps in the outfield. And what I was struck, aside from the muted theme, was the way they're running in step. They're almost like soldiers, completely in sync. It was really beautiful.
Yeah, I thought the score of the film was just so perfect because it's so laid back and just lets the story it gives the story a rhythm without overpowering it.
Right. So we got any other votes here? Somebody must be paying attention.
I like the film. I mean, the thing is, that there's a difference between the U.S. Steel Hour presentation, which is about baseball in its time, and the film, which is about baseball, 10 to 12, 13 years later. And there are so many period touches, that ridiculous scene where they all go and lip sync a song on a TV show. It's just so much of the era. I thought that was kind of charming. And the use of, and the use of sort of historical film in it, of actual game film shot was interesting too. I thought, they gave it kind of a verite, even though the film quality is totally different. Like the game shots are shot in a sort of a different gradation of film, it seems, than the rest of the movie, which is sort of jarring, but at the same time, it lets you know also, oh yeah, that's actual Major League Baseball that's being shown here.
Did anybody like the book?
Oh, I love the book. I just, as I said, I mean, I guess we got a bunch of silent partners here.
I think what's interesting
What
is
do you
some
think,
of the,
Gary?
Well, I liked the book just because I thought it set us back to kind of the 50s. And, that was kind of an interesting period of time when, there were no free agents and there was a lot more prevalent, racism. And, it was just, a period that interests me, from that perspective, so I like that. But the movie was good as well. The movie was set more like in the 70s, obviously. And the book was written in 1956. Is that correct?
Published in 56, right? So,
yeah,
right.
I think that actually raises one distinction between the book and the movie, and it's very subtle. But when they come back from the Mayo Clinic to Bruce's family's house in Georgia, they have a black housekeeper, and in the movie you see Bruce give her a big hug, and in the book it's very clear that the racial dynamics of pre-Jim Crow South were in play there, and you kind of get this very ugly look at Bruce's the race relations that Bruce came up in and kind of internalized, and seeing that change in the 70s is really interesting. It's just in such a short period of time that you would change that character so much, and it doesn't feel forced. It doesn't feel like it was a politically correct decision to make. It's just in the 70s, things have changed.
There's a lot more complexity to the book because, there's that whole dynamic of where the lead guy, Henry
Wiggen,
has the interaction with the black baseball players. And there's the whole segment of the guy trying to break Babe Ruth's record. And, so when you condense it down to a movie and write the screenplay, and you're trying to make it a little more of a mass appeal thing, you get a different kind of experience. And they were both good. I thought the movie was a little stilted, in my opinion. I think they were trying to stick to the dialogue of the book, but so.
I think that the movie was close to perfect in terms of its the relationship and the relationship with the game. The book was more complex, which is what you get out of a book, but I don't know how you could have improved the movie much based on the story that they started with. So
Well, the movie was really good, and De Niro was excellent in that role. So
Right. I agree. De Niro did not look like an athlete or a ball player, but he did. His acting was great. Actually, I thought everyone was great, at least in the main roles.
I remember many years ago on AMC, they had an intro to the film where they talked about the dynamic between Michael Moriarty and Robert De Niro. I guess they had both been cast in to be part of the film, but the roles hadn't been sorted out. And at the time, the decision was that Michael Moriarty was the more bankable star, or the one that was more that was more likely to go on to Hollywood.
Jeff, why don't you log off and rejoin? Maybe that'll stop the feedback problem.
I think it was just coming through someone else's.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah. But anyway, so that Moriarty was going to be the big star, so that's why he played Henry Wiggen, and that's why Robert De Niro played Bruce Pearson. But obviously, it worked out quite differently.
Right.
Right. And Jeff, you should point out, because you're the one who's picked up on this, that Moriarty has, a lot of Detroit connections.
Yeah, he grew up here, and I believe he either went to Cranbrook or U of D Jesuit. I wasn't able to track that down today, but I've heard both versions of that. His grandfather was George Moriarty, who played for the Tigers and then became an umpire for many years.
Oh, sure. Okay.
And I think there was a rivalry between him and Ty Cobb. I don't know if anyone can better versed in that era of baseball speak to that, but I think that's a story I remember from somewhere about him.
Speaking of the actors, Moriarty and De Niro, when I decided to attend this discussion, I pulled out my book, Baseball in the Movies, a comprehensive reference from 1915 to 1991 by Hal Erickson. And as I think a lot of things have been written about Robert De Niro to this effect, but that he threw himself into this role fully, and that he just worked and worked and worked to become somewhat competent as a baseball in throwing, catching, and so forth. And by contrast, according to this book, Moriarty played the part of a little celebrity. He took, like during the breaks, he said De Niro would separate himself from the cast and really throw himself into the work. Moriarty, who is assumed to be, one of the real stars, took it easier and signed autographs, did things like that. And that was one reason that this author at least felt that De Niro's career took off so much. And it was just typical, I think, of other roles that he's had in the more recent past, or in the last decades, where he really threw himself into the role to get everything out of it he could.
For sure. You know, it's interesting. Robert De Niro physically does not look like how Bruce Pearson is described in the book, which is this big kind of catcher, an ex-football player. And obviously Robert De Niro is kind of a thin and short guy. But the one baseball moment with De Niro is there's a scene later in the film where he hits I think a double or a triple. And it's really well shot, but he doesn't look like a catcher, but he definitely looks like a baseball player when he belts that one.
Yes, one of the comments in this book was that he hated chewing tobacco. He said that was the worst part about it, was that he had to learn to chew tobacco. And somebody told him that if he mixed it with bubble gum, it would taste better, and that and it would help keep his teeth white. And he said, the bubble gum helped the taste of the tobacco a little bit, but it didn't do anything for his teeth.
My one experience with chewing tobacco is very similar to that scene in The Sandlot where they tried chewing tobacco. So I can't imagine having to do that for a 3 or 4 week movie shoot.
No.
So, Gary, this is Ken. I much preferred the book, although I read the book before I saw the movie. And although I had one of the original paperbacks as a kid, I don't think I ever read it. So I had to reorder it. I came up with this version, which has a 4 or 6 page intro by the author describing the shooting of the movie, which I don't know if you all were able to read that, but it's pretty interesting. And I felt, and again, I read the book first before I saw the movie, you're flipping from the 50s to the 70s. I'm not sure. I know the dress changed, the cars changed. I'm not sure much of the dialogue changed. I didn't know that it translated that well, spanning, jumping 2 decades. But the preface that he wrote about how he was approached by a producer who had never produced a movie. He was a successful attorney that had the money, so he bought the rights to produce the movie, hired a director, and the dynamic that occurred between those 3, and ultimately Harris got booted off the set and wasn't allowed to interact anymore. I found that to be as interesting as anything else.
Yeah.
As I understand, it's not uncommon in Hollywood to ban the writers.
Yeah, we bought your book now,
set.
beat it.
Yeah, that they're a pain in the ass because they actually care about what they do, and they care about how their work is rendered, which would be, of not even of tertiary or quaternary importance in Hollywood. So
yeah, and I bought into Moriarty more than I did De Niro, maybe because of De Niro's stature. He was a young kind of rookie actor. I just bought into the Henry character more than I did De Niro's for whatever reason in the movie.
What do you think of Henry's pitching in the movie?
I thought it was good. I mean, who do you compare it to? Kevin Costner? What are the comparisons? I thought he did pretty well.
He was kind of lobbing it up there. It didn't seem too fast.
But what
he's not William Bendix out there.
What in that intro? What did Harris say? Did he say anything about what he would have done differently in the movie?
Well, he was extremely verbose. His screenplay was hundreds of pages long, I think.
Okay.
And that's likely why I enjoyed the book more, is the movie left so much out. So the tug of war between the 3, the director, the producer, and the author, was about what to leave out, what to put in. And again, when I watched the movie, it was interesting, the scene where the De Niro character was dying, and he called his girlfriend / prostitute. And in the book, it was a much more elongated dialogue, but in the movie, you get that dial tone. And I remember thinking, I don't remember it went down that way in the book. But as he pointed out, Harris conceded that the director wanted to use gestures more than language and dialogue. and he didn't get it at that point. But when he saw the movie and saw that scene where De Niro heard the dialogue and pretended she was still on the line, he finally got it. He's like, okay, that's how in a movie you can condense it and use gestures more effectively, perhaps, than, at least more concisely than dialogue.
This actually kind of dovetails to another topic I have, and why don't we just do it now, is if we were to remake Bang the Drum Slowly today in modern baseball, what do you guys think would be the big differences? What would be the things that we need to update and change for the story to make it a 2023 story?
Well, you could have Robert De Niro own the team.
I'm not sure Henry would be Southern Insurance, because he'd be making enough money.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, they wouldn't have these off-season jobs.
Exactly.
I think
And-
what you would do here, like in the baseball movies they make today, they try and make the baseball portion of it a little more authentic, you know, and it wasn't all that authentic. You know, they showed clips from a distance, and despite what you said about De Niro, he didn't look very good at the bat. In today's movies, they hire baseball players to actually be part of the film. You know, they would do that. You know, they might even, because they would recognize that the book was done in the 50s, they might try and recreate, you know, that experience there. And those are a couple, I have to think some more. That's a really good question. But I think visually the movie would be very different now than it was then, in terms of, and a lot of that's just the advancement of, you know, Hollywood and how they make movies and things of that nature.
You couldn't really set it in the present because things like Hodgkin's disease are pretty curable now. So you'd either have to come up with a different disease or make sure that it is set back in the 40s or 50s or 60s.
Yeah, well, that would have been easy. You could have given up pancreatic cancer or something like that. I think the bigger problem would be the idea that ball players were poor, and you know, you could inflate the salaries and have Wiggen holding out for an extra $5 million or something, but it just wouldn't play right. Those were working class stiffs back then, who and ball players mostly are not now, of course.
I think you probably could have Pearson be a guy who's basically making the league minimum and not really good with his money, and the Wiggen character realizing that he needs another year just to provide that nest egg for his family. You're right. He wouldn't be selling insurance. Maybe he would own an insurance company as part of his business empire, along the lines of someone like LeBron James or Alex Rodriguez.
Well, it's true. On the other hand, Wiggen could have had some disastrous business venture, right? I mean,
Yeah.
ball players and athletes in general often make bad investments. I think partly because they get either their friends to be their investment banker or their investment advisor, and their friends don't know anything about it, or they get people who deliberately trying to fleece them, you know, who know that they are vulnerable, know they have a lot of money, know that they don't have a lot of time to pay attention, and they're in there to scam them or skim from them. So that wouldn't be hard. I don't know. I got the feeling watching the opening scene, you look at that Yankee Stadium now, and you look at the Taj Mahal, that's the Yankee Stadium in '73, and you look at the Taj Mahal now, and you look at the players, and it's just hard to imagine translating that. You know, there aren't any Vincent Gardinas or Dutches anymore, or I suppose there are a few. Jim Leland would have been a good model for the manager, but he's gone now, what, close to 10 years?
And you got that he just got elected to the Hall of Fame.
I didn't see that.
Yeah,
Who else?
he was
just
he,
now.
and he was the only one. So I'll just throw that in there since he brought Leland. He was the only one on that in that ballot to make it.
Good.
Interesting.
He would have
No Joe
smoked like
West,
Vincent
huh?
Gardenia in the film.
Well, I agree with the others. I think the whole dynamics of that would be different. with modern, and as bad as the reserve clause was, and as bad as the players got screwed at that time, that was a part of the movie where he's sending the letter to the owner, and I thought Lincoln freed the slaves, all of that. You could twist it around with a different disease, with having Pearson making minimum salary and peeing it away, and if you were to make the movie now, it doesn't mean that you couldn't still set it back in reserve clause days and have those aspects. But I think a lot would be lost if you tried to make it now and work around those things.
And actually, the line wasn't that the slaves got freed by Lincoln. The line was the slaves got freed when Lincoln got shot.
Yeah, when he got shot.
Right, which I thought was really weird because everyone knows about the Emancipation Proclamation and the idea that he would get it wrong, presumably not deliberately, and say, I thought the slaves were free when Lincoln was shot. It was
it worked. It worked much better in the book because it fit Henry Wiggen as being not as smart as Henry Wiggen thinks he is.
But it's ignorant ball players, right?
That showed in a lot of ways, and he was more unusual as an author back then. I mean, by the time the 73 movie was made, but when the book was made, you didn't even have Jim Bronson in yet. Imagine playing Teg War and finding a fish in the lobby of the hotel. It's not that they wouldn't be recognizable. He was a big star pitcher, but just in a hotel now, there's so many people who would be there to clamor around the star players, and all of those aspects that were a little more quaint at that time. You just couldn't make it. Would be so different to make it modern. If you redid the movie and set it back in 1970, it could still work.
The idea that a guy would have a terminal illness and be playing in the major leagues and it wouldn't be diagnosed, and I mean, I don't think that would happen today.
That's true. I happened to see Arn Tellem, the former agent, speak on Friday, and he said he spent more time as an agent with doctors than he did with anyone else, because they were always seeking second, third opinions. Should he have surgery? Should he have this test? What should we, it's to your point, if you've got any deficiency, they're all over it right now. But back to the notion that Henry kept saying, or somebody kept saying, I saw the slaves were freed when Lincoln was shot. I mean, in the book, and the movie isn't as capable of picking up these subtleties, but instead of saying entitled all the time, it's in title, right? Instead of saying sixth sense all the time, they say 6 cents, and there were more. It just, I guess the image of a ball player in the 50s is they're a bunch of ignorant athletes. And today, I don't know if you made that movie today. I don't know that they're walking around saying entitled, IN, instead of entitled, right?
Right. Well, now most ball players go to college. Some of them even go to class, I think. Whereas back then there would have been, I think people historically underestimate the number of ball players that went to college. Even in the Negro Leagues, a lot of the ball players had gone to college, but certainly a higher proportion now have gone to college, and they're better educated and more worldly. They don't come from backwoods Alabama or backwoods Georgia and burst into the majors. They're more likely to be from middle class or upper middle class suburb. The one thing that I thought was interesting, I believe in the movie, and if I missed it, shame on me, that they never explained why Bruce is calling Henry Wiggen Arthur, and everyone else in the movie, I believe, calls him Arthur as well. And there's no explanation of that. Where obviously in the book it's explained, and it's a key character trait or character tell on Pearson.
But that's one of those subtleties, right? Where I believe that De Niro was calling him Arthur because he did in the book, and everyone else said author, but it wasn't easily distinguished, which you can clearly see in the book, not so much in the movie. And they didn't explain why at all. But it was the nitwit, to use the term that the book used, nature of the De Niro character.
Well, from what I could tell, everyone was calling him Arthur. Did anyone else pick that up? Excuse me, my voices.
Yeah, I thought it was just, it's been a while, but others were saying it properly, author, and Bruce wasn't sharp enough he just thought it was Arthur, just another way of showing that he wasn't he was kind of a little bit dim.
Yeah, I thought, Gary, that they were calling him Arthur in the movie.
Which would make zero sense, right?
Yeah, it didn't make any sense.
Except to take him down a peg, maybe.
No, just the nickname, I mean.
Were they trying to do that?
Trying to take Wiggen down a peg?
By calling him Arthur, like sort of like he's
Sarcastic.
King Arthur, like he's a big hero.
Like
Just
Sarcastically?
instead of our author.
I
I
thought
didn't-
that both in the books and in the movie, there was this undercurrent of Wiggen being sort of a supercilious twit
Yeah.
in some ways. Now, he was very smart, and he did a mitzvah for Pearson, and he's obviously a good ball player and very studious ball player, right? But I did in both the books and the movie sense that there's this supercilious twit aspect to him that they're trying to point out periodically.
I think one thing the movie loses from the book is the character of his wife Holly, who in all the books is a pretty strong character and pretty much the person who's there to check Henry's BS. Whereas in the movie she's just kind of there.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And of course that's either you can't put everything in a novel, you can't even put most stuff in a novel in a movie, or that's the standard criticism of filmmakers at film festivals when people criticize, you could have done this, you should have done this. I say, that's the movie you wanted to make. I made the movie I wanted to make.
Right.
Sure.
But she was one-dimensional, right? She was very one-dimensional.
Right. They didn't convey, since Bruce was supposed to be such a despicable character, why she got along with him so well. And her role was pretty small in the movie.
Yeah, I get the feeling that that was an intentional choice to make Bruce more sympathetic in the movie, because you just don't have the time to develop sympathy for this guy who, I mean, I think he's introduced in the book, right, with the scene where he comes to camp drunk late and they have to dry him out or put him in the shower to sober him up, and he's puking on himself, and then he's kind of a racist, and it takes a while to warm up to him in the book, whereas in the film he's sympathetic right from the get-go.
Yeah, I mean it's so hard. Like every time you see an adaptation, you think, why'd they do that? Why'd they do that? I think it's just I suppose today movies are longer. You could have spent an extra half an hour on all that exposition, but back then probably not.
Yeah, I was surprised that it was only a little, like an hour and a half, hour and 36 minutes.
Yeah.
So you could have done more in 2 hours.
And I didn't watch the other version, but it was even shorter. How can you go anywhere?
Well, you should watch it, Ken. It's only an hour long from remember correctly, maybe hour 5. I think it's an hour actually, because it was a TV production and it's very one-dimensional, partly because of the technology, and partly because it's condensed into an hour, and it's just like, it's a stage set, and and so it's very different in much sort of every criticism people are saying now of it simplifying things or leaving things out or whatever is magnified by a factor of 10. That's right. I hadn't thought. That's a good point, that you can have longer movies today. The old 90 minutes and you're out is not at all standard anymore. Of course, now I think it's after 2 hours, you've got to persuade the producers and the distributors that this movie is worth it, because then it starts bumping into where you can only have 2 showings a night for a 2-hour movie, or 1 showing if it goes 2.5 hours or something. But back then it was an hour and a half was pretty much standard.
I wonder if that would be an art house movie today if it was made, rather than because you know, maybe what they would do with it. I mean, I'm not sure if that kind of film would survive as it is today without putting in more stuff about the wife, the girlfriend, the prostitute, whatever, you know.
Exactly. It didn't
I
have,
think it would almost be a like a 5 episode miniseries on a streaming platform today.
Yeah.
it didn't have what I would think would be wide appeal in today's audience. And then actually in the movie, they left out a whole thing that I think was in the book, is this whole underlying comments about life and death and existentialism. And if you read the book, there were various thoughts about, you know, why aren't people more, live it up more, because we're all going to die. And then he was having a baby, and there were various things about all of that. And there was none of that in the movie at all. So I think you could transform it into like more of an art film with adding, you know, that dimension in and the role of women. And I think it could be a much different film.
I would push back a little bit on the lack of the life and death stuff in the film. I think there's not as much of it, certainly, but
Right.
the opening, not the opening credit scene, but the opening scene where they're driving along and he's narrating from, you know, I think directly from the book about driving
Right.
along and there's someone's dying and the world goes on.
Yeah, you're right. But
That's a scene that's always stuck with me. That's a scene that I think even more so than that beautiful image of them running that grabbed me the first time I saw it.
So I have a question here. This is perhaps off topic, but Stu mentioned, you know, could you make it an art house movie? I was just trying to think, how many baseball movies were ever art house movies? I think of all the baseball movies I can think of were, you know, Hollywood, mass market, or they were really obscure little movies like Talent for the Game or something like that. I'm trying to think. I'm you know, forgetting, but were there any baseball art house movies in the
No.
last 75 years?
see, I think film now has evolved into the fact that like movies like maybe Bull Durham or, you know, some of the other baseball movies wouldn't be quite so popular today. There's so much sensationalism in terms of movies, and the producers only investing on things that are going to be really top hits. And I think it would be harder to get made some of the kind of movies that I don't know, what else are we talking about besides, you know, like the Kevin Costner movie, you know, and things of that. The other one where he's the pitcher, but so maybe calling it an art house movie is a little bit of a misnomer, but
Well, baseball now isn't, I mean, you used to have all these, even 15, 20 years ago, baseball was more popular with
Yeah.
the chattering class, you know, and so it's like, you know, we may not have a lot of regular circulation baseball films anymore.
right.
You know,
There's
right
a
now, if you were
film.
going to make something, it might be an art house film. You know, I'm sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to
Sorry.
interrupt.
No, I just wanted to say if there's a film from 2008 called Sugar that's about a 19-year-old Dominican player
Right.
who enters the minor leagues. That was a pretty good one. If
That's a
anyone
good
has
point.
seen.
That is recent and sort of straddles a line between commercial and art house, I think. One of the things that fascinated me was in the movie, they take a dig at baseball's declining popularity. Remember the doctor? I don't remember why he was called,
Yeah.
but the doctor says,
Yeah.
I detest baseball. It's a dying sport, isn't it? Something like that.
Yes.
And I'm thinking, wow, this is 1973 and it's a
Yeah.
baseball movie and they throw that in there. But 73 was just about the time, within a couple of years, that pro football surpassed baseball as the most popular sport, a favorite sport amongst American sports fans in polling. And it's also the time just coming out of Vietnam where baseball is considered to be passe, and that violent sports like football were considered to be much more attuned to the modern American psyche than a supposedly pastoral sport like baseball. So in that sense, it's not it's not an anachronism, but it sure was. It sure stuck out at me when I saw it the second time when I rewatched it last week.
I'm looking for it in the book, and I sort of found the general scene. I'm looking for the doctor's quote. I think it may have been, that line may have been in the book. No, he asked a different question. Okay. Yeah, he asks in the book, "Pardon me for asking a stupid question, but I thought Babe Ruth died some while ago. Yet I keep seeing Babe Ruth down in the corner of the page every morning," because the subplot about the home run chase and their
Which
teammate.
didn't make the movie, right? That didn't make the movie at
No.
all.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, it's, and the character in the home run chase was named Sid Goldman, and I, very clearly was sort of meant to be a Hank Greenberg figure. I think he even ends up with 58 home runs at the end. He runs out of steam. His home run chase runs out of steam, and it not only was the Jewish ball player, but the mechanics of his home run chase seemed to match Greenberg's.
Did Goldman in the book bat right-handed or left-handed? I don't remember.
Let me look up. I didn't remember the lineup is at the front of the book, so.
Yeah. Oh, there's an art house baseball movie. Is Aviva Kempner's Hank Greenberg, Life and Times of Hank Greenberg. That is truly an art house movie, and it was very successful. I mean, as art house movies go. How many people have seen that?
I've seen it. I've seen it. I own it.
Yeah,
I have
I
not
have
seen that.
I have two DVDs of it. One was the original, and then the reissue, maybe, I don't know, 8-10 years ago, where they had several hours updated footage, not in the movie, but like an interview with Senator Carl Levin talking about how much it meant to him, and a bunch of other stuff.
I don't know if it's technically an art house film, but there was a documentary HBO aired some years ago about the LA recruiting the Dodgers. That was kind of in that similar vein. One of the participants was a woman who had been on the city council in Los Angeles in the 1950s, an Asian American woman, which is a different perspective on that. The Brooklyn Dodgers leaving for LA, to hear it from the LA perspective. I guess I'd call that in the vein of an art house movie.
Yeah, I didn't see that. PBS did, I think it was a 1 hour thing on Chavez Ravine, but
Sure.
that's different. Right. So we have only a handful of people saw the Hank Greenberg doc.
I did. We saw it. We went as a
Yeah, I
SABR
did
group
not see
to a
it.
theater. It was kind of one of the, I don't know. I'm not sure exactly what an art house movie is, because I'm really quite a Philistine, but it was at one of the like uptown Minneapolis theaters, which would do something different than Basic Instinct or something like that. So I guess in that sense, it was an art house movie, but our SABR chapter went and saw it as a group.
Well, I never thought about the definition of an art house, but if you ask me, I would say it's a small film theater and frequently plays foreign films. And if it plays foreign films, it's an art house. That seems to me that's true, that you hardly ever see a foreign film in a standard American theater, and almost any theater that shows foreign films only shows independent American movies or obscure American movies by maverick directors.
Yeah, obscure. That's the key word there, right? Not popular enough to make the multiplex. What, if I may ask, and this was really verbatim in both the book and the movie, the very end. Yeah.
I don't rag it from this point on. I don't rag anyone.
I rag nobody. Yeah.
Rag nobody. Yeah, from here on in, I rag nobody.
So your question is, what does that mean?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, what did you think of it? What does that mean? Is it a movie about bullying? Is that what it is? And plus
you get into the, be kind to everybody. You don't know what they're dealing with. And I mean, even the bumper sticker type of sentiments and that's what I thought on that. I don't know that Henry ever bullied Bruce, but just kind of a lesson that he learned. He saw him getting ragged by other people, and it's just a lesson to be kind, especially you just don't know what's going on with a person.
I
It wasn't
connected.
necessarily bullying him as much as making fun of him or not taking
Yeah.
him seriously.
Yeah.
I connected it more to the idea that the Bruce, the catcher, people were ragging on him, and there was talk in the book about, being nice to people because we're all kind of in this together and we're going to die. And remember where the manager gets up and he kind of apologizes in terms of his behavior. And I think the whole thing was, I went through this whole thing and this guy died. And one of the lessons I got out of that is I've got to be kinder to my fellow man. And that was my interpretation of that.
Me
Yeah, you
too.
don't understand their circumstances. And as part of that closing scene too, he made the comment that nobody from the team showed up.
Right. He was the
Right.
only one who showed up at the funeral.
That was crazy.
There were
Yeah.
flowers from the club, but no person from the club.
Right.
Right. I thought that was a nice touch. Mike Clark, who was
Oh,
a great,
sorry. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Gary.
Mike Clark, who was a great movie critic, and then went on to the American Film Theater or whatever it is, American Film Institute in Washington. He was a film critic for USA Today back in the 80s and 90s or something. And he would point out movies that stand the test of time don't pull their punches at the end. They don't tie everything up in a neat bow. They don't go the sentimental route. And I thought that was a tribute to Harris. At the end, he didn't have, 3 or 4 weeping teammates at the grave. He said exactly what would happen in the real world. Bruce Pearson is forgotten by the guys who were hanging out, drinking beer and whatever with him in the hotel room because they knew he was dying. He's dead. They won the World Series. He's forgotten. And the
Yeah.
club, the club never cares. The club just sent flowers. I thought that was a very nice touch.
Reminded me of Frank Lane, who they said that when he died, no one came to his funeral. There were only 2 people there, I think.
Who we talking about?
Frank Lane, Trader Lane,
Frank Lane. Yeah.
There's also just before that line in both the book and the movie, his narration about sending him the scorecard from the series, and I think that final line kind of ties back to that a little bit in my mind, that he's got this regret. He promised his friend this thing, he didn't do it, and I think the I rag no one is maybe his way of rectifying that.
And that's interesting. And my wife, who did not read the book, but who did agree to sit down with me for the movie, was more upset with the fact that he failed to mail the scorecard than she was with the tobacco chewing scenes, which totally repulsed her. But she couldn't get over that after being there for Bruce for the whole season and more. At the end, he didn't put the darn scorecard in the mail. What the heck?
I thought that was odd too, and my interpretation is the author wanted you to know how conflicted Wiggen was. Wiggen really was a completely different person than Bruce Pearson. Normally, he wouldn't even speak to someone like Bruce, right? And he had to force himself to be nice. He had to force himself to go to the rural South. He had to force himself to do all these things. And I think the fact that he didn't send the scorecard was a sense that, it's over. He's dying, where the World Series is done. I just imagine him like some college student who can't face the fact that they're going to fail a class. And so they put their textbook and all their stuff on their desk every night, like they're going to study, but they never study. and the next day it's still there to remind them, and they still don't do it. He had a mental block, and the mental block was he really was conflicted about being friends with Bruce Pearson, because Bruce was nothing like him. And except for being a nice guy, it was, well, what, he was pretty much, well, he wasn't pretty much adult. He was adult, and that was my interpretation of it. It was callous, very callous, but still.
If you go back to the first book, the Southpaw, if you remember, Henry originally was rooming with Perry Simpson. They were rookies together, and Perry was black, and then the team added a second black player to the roster. So those two began to room together, as explains in the book, in part because in St. Louis they'd have to room somewhere differently. And that's how Wiggen and Pearson ended up together. It was not roommates by choice situation.
That's interesting. I didn't remember that.
That's another thing that if you did it today, you wouldn't have the roommate dynamic, would you?
Absolutely. Right.
That's true.
Right. You would have many more Latino players and probably the same small number of African-American players. And there'd have to be some reckoning with Latino culture or the separateness of the Latino culture in the clubhouse. See, because since the movie was so heavily centered on pulling together as a team, I almost, except that it isn't a football movie, I almost expected somebody to say there's no I in team. But if you had a modern clubhouse, they're often divided not along racial lines, as along ethnic lines. If Latino, if you don't want to count that as a race, which most people don't, because the Spanish players don't all speak English well, and sometimes and they just have a different culture. It's sort of to me, it's like the divide years ago between white and black players. If anyone's ever read Howard Bryant's book Shut Out about the Red Sox, it wasn't just in '59 they were divided strictly on racial lines. 30 years later, they're divided absolutely strictly along racial lines, if I remember his book correctly.
Well, you're mentioning the Latino players reminds me that one of the scenes that I thought played well in the book, but played better in the movie, was when the manager was giving a speech and the translator was translating for the Latino player, and he would translate the bzzz. I thought that was hilarious in the movie. You could see his frustration.
Right. I love Vincent Gardenia's performance. Jeff and I were talking the other night. I think that while he didn't look like a '70s baseball manager, and his dialogue was too erudite for most baseball managers of those days, his crusty sort of "F you, I'm the boss" attitude was still, that was the attitude of baseball managers. I mean, and I thought that in spirit he got it right for baseball managers of that era.
It gives me a laugh is the scene where they pull the fast one on Dutch and say that Bruce was up in the Mayo Clinic to get treated for the clap. and Vincent Gardenia just absolutely melts down, and it's like, it's going to run around my entire infield. I've seen the girls he's with.
Right. Because having the clap was entirely believable, right?
Right.
Almost any other disease he picked, he would say, nah. Right. But that was like, oh my God, Yeah. Another great thing I really liked was the point where the coach was Yaros. They're playing tag war in the lobby, and they got a fish there, and the fish is talking about, or somebody mentioned, maybe it was Wiggen mentioned a new rule, and the coach throws up his hands and says, "New rules? There haven't been any new rules since the Black Sox scandal in 1919." And I thought, yeah, that's sort of true about baseball, right? I mean, in 1973, that's pretty much true about baseball. They're still playing the same game then. Not now, but back then.
And of course, I guess it's not supposed to be lost on us that the team was not performing to their potential until Bruce's condition was known and everybody stopped ragging on each other and they kind of coalesced as a team.
Right. Absolutely. In that sense, it was as cliched as Field of Dreams, in my view.
Was that, okay, I mean, today, culture, if you did a bullshit bingo among announcers, culture would be on there. That really was that as big a deal early 70s where they just talked about, maybe they didn't say culture, but the team
Morale
loving
or
each
whatever,
other.
yeah.
Well, they roomed together, they rode the train for hours together, which today, neither of that is true, right?
Yeah, but did you have to get along? And, you know, I mean, the way it is now, well, we don't want to bring this guy and he might disrupt the clubhouse sort of thing. I can't remember if it was more Leo DeRocher, if the guy can play, who cares if he's an asshole, you know, nice guys. Not that nice guys finish last, but you can be nice guys and finish last.
Well, I mean, there was one dynamic. Anyone who was intellectual was ostracized.
Well, yeah, there you go.
Jim Bouton, right? I mean,
Yeah.
right? Not because he was a great reader, because he read a book. Remember, he had read one book. Yeah, I suppose that's true. That the cultural divides wouldn't be as sharp as they are now in many ways. The minority players would generally take a back seat. The white players, the managers were all white. The coaches would be virtually all white. I don't even think they had a token Latino coach back then. So very much, I think it was easier to have clubhouse cohesion when the white people ruled the place. I'm not saying that's the right thing or the way you want it, but I think it was easier. Does anyone pick up on the fact, and Jeff was one pointed this out to me, that of course the Mammoths really are the New York Giants, but they're wearing replica Yankee caps and uniforms. And I thought that's interesting. It's also interesting in the beginning they have a disclaimer saying that baseball players and teams are fictionalized, and yet there's so much true to life stuff, including the MLB footage they used. So it really was a mixed bag. But the fact that the Mammoths were clearly a National League club, and yet they were wearing Yankees uniforms and played in Yankee Stadium was really odd.
I don't know. I read the book, and after reading the book, you know that all the teams are all fictionalized, and there's like no reality to it. One thing in the book is they talk about Washington, and I don't think that's even in the movie. Do they mention Washington? I don't think so.
I don't remember it. No,
I don't think so.
No, in the book there is the mention of the pitcher Scudder from Brooklyn, and in the movie he's in Oakland. Yeah, I mean, so they definitely mixed up the teams and leagues.
Right.
Now, in the books, they do talk about the Mammoths uniforms being red and blue, and seems very much written as about the Giants or based on the Giants.
Yeah, I found that insertion of the major league footage kind of interesting. Does anybody remember what Dick McAuliffe's number was? Was it 1?
3? I thought it was 3.
3, yeah.
Because there was one scene where the guy running looked like Dick McAuliffe in that footage.
really.
Yeah, I guess it wasn't him because I think he was number 1.
The
think he
movie
was
came
great.
out in 73, and when you went back to the Tag War, hey, there's no rules changes since 1919. I take it they did the movie before the designated hitter came in. They were right on the cusp of that. Or there's some of the other things like changing Washington. I guess by the time they would have even been filming the movie, Washington was gone to Texas. But just thinking right when they were doing it of what was.
Was the DH 74?
73, but they could have been filming that whole thing before, before they adopted it, which.
Right. Well, most Hollywood movies were filmed back then at least a year before they were released. So
Mhm.
the rule change wouldn't have been adopted yet, I believe.
And was
Yeah.
that line in the book? I don't recall. I'm gonna think that it may have been, in which case I don't think the producer and director are that attuned with those nuances.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense, but as you mentioned, Brooklyn, hey, 72, Oakland, and even by that time, maybe Washington out of that. By that time, the Senators would have been gone.
I think that quote is actually directly out of the book, Gary, about the Sox. So the book was written in, what did we say, 55 or something like that. So
Right.
They just
Right.
retained it in the movie.
But don't you think that in 72, 73, I mean, before the DH, you could still apply that?
Yes.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I agree.
You could
The,
pretty much apply it after, after the DH. That was one huge thing, but it just marked how baseball's slow to
Right.
change.
Right. To me, the biggest changes were the integration of the game post-war, which that's not a rule. The change from the intimate ballparks, the jewel boxes they call them, to the super stadia, but that was currently going on then. Well, I guess most of them were already built at that point, and then the change to free agency, and that was in the future a couple years. So
And
for
the other changes, Gary, you said, like, from 72 back to Black Sox, not that much changes, although certainly the integration was huge. And from 72 to now, the changes in the game weren't by rules, it's how it's played. I mean, well, in the last 20 years, the analytics and the launch angle, but just the way pitching has changed to, it's the changes have been not of anything that went into the rule book for the most part.
well, I think there have been important rulebook changes, but in 72, I would say most of the changes are outside the rule book, right? And as you point out, there are plenty of non-rule book changes now that completely change the way the game is played.
Mhm.
So,
I mean, I think even non-rule book changes. I mean, the way pitchers were handled and bullpens
Yes,
and
that's
forming
what I
rotations
meant.
was
Yeah.
still
Yeah, I
consistent.
mean, complete games are a thing of the past. Go out there, throw six hard. But even before it was getting to that, just the specialization and relief pitching, which was not brought, well, you could argue it's brought about changing save rule and the managers adapting to the save rule, but that's what people say by the DH wrecked. Well, the changes have been much greater outside of that, just how the game evolved, not because somebody said we're going to do it different.
Well, that would be another discussion. I agree with what you said, but I think some of the rule changes we've had recently have had dramatic impacts on the game.
Yeah, and I'm saying you're right, Jerry. I mean, especially the last few, although some people have said that pitch clock and shift restrictions, it's only radical and it's taking us back to the 1960s. I mean, of the last year.
But you have other things like instant replay, so the manager doesn't
Yes, you're right.
out and argue. There's no takeouts at home or second base.
Yeah.
Lean into the stands and catch balls because there's a net there. I mean, there's a lot of changes in the game.
Just the larger bases.
Yeah, but I still think that just how it evolved without there being rules books changes on how they've done pitching, and then last 20 years with analytics and working the pitchers more. And the people who will say analytics ruin the game, I don't say that, but it changed the game, and not necessarily in a more positive way, because it might not be as aesthetically pleasing with far fewer balls put in play. Although official scores love it, it makes a job of an official score much easier. But things are revolutionary, evolutionary.
Recall too that in the book, I believe Henry worked out of the bullpen a game or two
Oh,
mid-season.
did
He
he?
did, yeah.
No.
Yeah,
Wouldn't have
there you
to play
go.
for the last game of the World Series, right?
That'll still happen now, but not so much during the regular season. Well, you're right, Ken. It's just, okay, well, we need this guy in the pen for this game in between starts or something like that. Wouldn't be done now.
That wasn't uncommon in the 50s and stuff like
Right.
that.
Right.
Right, the closer role, which then was called the relief ace or the fireman, really didn't get established until the 60s. I mean, there were
Well,
closers in the 50s, but
even
not
then, they were more firemen. The closer, you think, getting into Eckersley in the one inning and
Yeah.
rack up massive saves, as opposed to
right,
Sparky Lyle as a fireman.
Right. You got
Right.
runners on. Yeah. Bring in the firemen.
yeah. What I was saying is the closer being your ace relief pitcher. No one mentioned that.
Right.
They called them the bullpen aces then, or the ace reliever, or
Mhm.
the fireman.
Yeah.
And that
Wait, Wilhelm wasn't a fireman, but
Yeah, you wouldn't think of him as a fireman, but Dick Raditz. How's Dick
Bucket Brigade.
Raditz?
there you go.
Which is why Dick Raditz lasted a year as a star, because he couldn't do what he was doing more than a year. It might be 3 1/3 innings and he was a fireballer, but you're right. You're right. There were the earlier guys, Johnny Murphy, and then Jim Constanti, but it was still pretty much relievers were those who weren't good enough to be a starter. Of course, some people called it ace closers, failed starters, but that evolved so much on the use of pitching.
right. It was, yeah, it was very different. Yeah, of course now you have lots of pitchers who blow out their arms too, but there's Tommy John surgery, and much better medical care to rescue them.
Yeah.
So I would like to take a poll. I am a constant warrior on this, but I won't tip it. What are people's favorite baseball movies?
Movies.
Besides,
your favorite baseball movie.
Well,
besides this one, I like League of Their Own.
Oh, good
I'll
choice.
say Bull Durham.
Okay, good choice.
it's not the most serious baseball movie, but Major League is definitely in my top 3 with Bull Durham and Bang the Drum Slowly.
I agree with your 3.
It's just so quotable when
Yeah.
this guy's dead. We'll cross him off then.
Well,
There's,
Major League is like the American Pie movie. It's
Sure.
just kind of a mess, but you enjoy it. It's fun.
well, there's
And
also Sandlot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My sons are mute on this call, but they might say Sandlot. I think I am partial to Bull Durham.
Are there any people, and I confess, no, I don't confess, I'll just admit it. I'm not a Bull Durham fan. I just found it boring, but I talk to people and I do find that for many people, Bull Durham is at the top of their list. So I'm not saying it's a bad movie. I just wasn't that into it. I don't know if anybody else will join me in admitting that.
I think we just all like Susan Sarandon, but what can I say?
Well, then get her in White Palace. If I can get salacious, if you're gonna have Susan Sarandon, and also don't ask her to talk about the Middle East situation either.
Right. So is this a baseball movie? What qualifies as a baseball movie, or is baseball simply the setting?
Yes.
I think baseball is the setting for this movie. I don't think it's a baseball movie, primarily.
Well, I mean, it seems to me it's so much imbued in baseball. It's hard not to call it a baseball movie. It isn't just a convenient setting. I mean, try to think of what other setting you'd put this movie in, where some intellectual guy who's a success and a maverick does this incredibly charitable thing for this backwoods dolt who is going to die and bucks the system to do it. And then it has enough leverage to get the people who have the power to go along with him. I don't know. I mean, I'm not a fan of football or basketball or hockey movies, although I've seen a few of them, but it's hard for me to see another setting where maybe some combat movie, because in combat, you can have really unlikely pairs who share the same foxhole in the same platoon, especially in the infantry. Maybe that would be a setting where you could have this kind of very dissimilar characters joining a team or melding a team because of their unique circumstance.
You could probably do it in like a college movie, like the shared major dorm mates that are kind of thrown together and these things happen. But you're right. Baseball is uniquely suited for this particular story. You could do it in an advertising agency.
I'll correct myself someone. I don't think the major theme of the movie was baseball, but I think the setting obviously was baseball. So you can say it's a baseball movie. I mean, a lot of other baseball movies, I think, are a little more focused on the athletic performance and the athletic outcome of an individual or the team. And I don't think that was the major focus here as much. I mean, obviously they wanted to win the pennant and all of that, but I don't think that was the major focus here.
You're right. They won the World Series, but never did those games enter into the story, right? It was, we won. That was irrelevant to a large degree.
Well, but this is true to its time in the 50s. Winning the pennant was a very big deal. I mean, damn Yankees. What did he do? He sold his soul to win the pennant, for the Senators to win the pennant, not to win the World Series. Right? I mean, winning the pennant was a huge deal. In fact, God, I'm going to, of course, when the Cavs won the NBA title a few years ago, there was this thing about it was the first time Cleveland had won a championship since the 50s, right? But that's not true.
Browns, but I don't care if the AFL was there. I call the Browns championship an overall one.
Okay, which 64, one are we talking about?
64.
Okay, all right.
Never mind that there was an AFL there, that it's still a legitimate championship.
Right, but that's right. They counted that as a championship, the Browns winning the championship, but they didn't count the Indians winning the pennant, which is winning the AL championship in 95. They didn't count that because you had to win the World Series. But winning the pennant in damn Yankees, it was very clear that was the big thing. And I felt that in Wiggen's novels, winning the pennant was the goal. The World Series wasn't quite a postseason exhibition. It wasn't certainly that, but it was anticlimactic. Winning the pennant was what really mattered.
But even in Bang the Drum Slowly, when they win the pennant, it's secondary to Bruce getting through that game, right? And the way that it transitions into the hospital scene, like that, any joy at that moment is so fleeting compared to like Major League, which you could argue like it was a little love story between the Tom Berenger character and I can't remember who played the woman. Like that, winning the pennant in that film was a huge part of that story. Like the celebration was a big scene.
Right, but I'm just trying to explain why in the movie.
Sure, no, I understand.
See the World Series games. They're just completely off screen, and it's clinching the pennant. That's the high point, right?
In the movie, yeah.
By
the time they made the movie, of course, they had split divisions. But I agree what you say, Gary. I mean, prior to splitting into divisions, it was a huge deal to win the pennant. When the Twins won it in '65, and never mind that they didn't win the World Series. After that, it was, what do we call the pennant? Winning the division when we go out and celebrate? Did we win the pennant? Or so I suppose that'd be reflected more in the book, that yeah, we won the pennant. That's huge.
In the days of the long season culminating with 154 or 162 games, and you are the one that's on top, the World Series wasn't anticlimactic, but really winning the league was an enormous achievement, which has been watered down considerably by having multiple divisions and wild card teams and all that sort of thing. It doesn't mean what it used to by any means.
Yes.
Right. And the leagues back then had distinct identities. You were loyal to your team, but your tribe was really the league. Your team was the clan, the tribe was the league, and the American League tribe did not like the National League tribe and vice versa.
Do you get money now if you win your pennant? Do the players get money?
Oh yeah. Yeah. They get money.
Tournament.
They get money down to second place in the division. Is that right?
I don't know.
In the pennant playoff, not in the divisions. I mean, it used to be first place, second place money, top 5 with one league had money. Now it's a tournament to.
So you
to
don't
do
get
that.
any money if you finish first in your division now.
I think correct. Well, well, of course, when it was Ernie Banks, poor guy, never got to make the win a pennant, make it to the World Series. And I mentioned the Twins when they made it. That was just so huge. And Harmon Killebrew was on a pennant winner and played in the World Series. And then later on, when it's, I'll say I think Killebrew is the greatest Twin ever, and somebody will say, well, Kirby's got 2 rings, and well, so does Al Newman. But I mean, it's not even getting credit for playing on a pennant winner playing in the World Series. It's an all or nothing thing in all of the sports. A ring used to be, well, hey, you got a pennant ring. Now
Yeah.
to get a ring, it means you played on the overall champion.
Right.
To
People
have played in the World Series was a big highlight of their career, regardless of
Oh yeah.
and that's not the case anymore.
Yes.
Yeah, I have to explain to people plenty of times that, you actually get a ring if you lose the World Series. You win the pennant, you lose the World Series, you still get a ring, just no one ever wears it.
Yeah.
Right. So they say they've got 3 rings because they won 3 World Series and they might have been in 5 total, Well, they got 5 rings, just 2 of them they never wear. Well,
I think one question that, the question of with a favorite baseball movie, I kind of struggle with that because there's such a breadth of types of baseball movies. I must confess, it may sound juvenile, but I enjoyed movies like Angels in the Outfield and things like that. But Major League would be one of my favorites, and 8 Men Out kind of dealt with this the competition for a pennant and the effects of the gambling on it. That's one that hasn't been mentioned that I enjoyed from an entertainment standpoint.
How about the winning team with Ronald Reagan? I mean,
yeah,
and going back,
or
I
the
can dare
Stratton
say
story.
Bendix or Pride of the Yankees, but some of the going way back to the 40s movies, which are hokey and all of that, but we've dealt with more recent movies.
It happens every spring.
Oh,
Yeah.
Dan, is that Dan
I
Daly?
love that when I was a kid.
And the Stratton story.
James Stewart. Yeah. I mean, it's fun to watch classic movies and have them be about baseball too.
There was the Gene
Natural.
Kelly, Frank
The
Sinatra
Natural.
one with the swimmer, the women swimmer.
Esther Williams.
Esther
Yeah.
Williams, yeah. It's a musical baseball movie.
Yeah.
The Natural, he strikes out in the book, but hits the home run in the movie.
Now, see, there's what I was waiting. No one mentioned, and 20 years ago, this would have been impossible to have a group of people. No one mentioned as one of their favorite baseball movies, either Field of Dreams or The Natural. That I found remarkable. I love The Natural. It is one of my favorites, maybe still my favorite baseball movie. I hate Field of Dreams, but 20 years ago, I bet that, 75% of the people who name one of their favorite 3 movies would have one or both of those.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Along with Bull Durham in that time.
Right. Bull Durham, but several people mentioned Bull Durham here tonight, but not one
Right,
person mentioned
yeah.
The Natural or Field of Dreams. And I'm also, and it's one of those things where even though the Redford movie sold out on the book, I love both of them. And when they talk about how the closing line in Bang the Drum Slowly is legitimately famous, I think the closing line of the book, The Natural, should be famous, except that it never made it in the movie. At the end of the book, if I remember correctly, the last line is, "And he wept many bitter tears." It's just a great coda to the book. But of course, no one would make that movie. You had to be Redford and change it completely to make it. The book had been optioned multiple times and never made into a movie until Redford figured out, well, hell, I'll just start and we'll hit a home run and win, right?
Mm-hmm.
The thing about Field of Dreams that will forever bug me is they in the book Shoeless Joe, right? He goes and gets J.D. Salinger, and in the film, it's the James Earl Jones character. And so you have this black actor who is described as like this icon of the civil rights movement. The character is described as an icon of the civil rights movement, going back to watch pre-integration major leaguers, and there's no mention of Josh Gibson. There's no mention of Satchel Paige. They would have taken 2 lines in the film for James Earl Jones to say, "There's some other guys that need to come back," and then have those guys come back. You know,
That would have been really cool. I do think that J.D. Salinger was pretty ticked off about the book.
yes,
And he did not want them to use him in the movie.
You know, I just if I can, I hope I'm not straying too far, but the Veda Panikvar was the editor up in Chisholm, Minnesota, who had written his Graham's obit and knew him well. And the movie came out, and after that, I read the book where Kinsella had certainly been up there on the Iron Range, because I was with somebody from the Iron Range. We went to visit Veda Panikvar in our newspaper office after the movie came out. And reading the book, it was clear that W.P. Kinsella had driven through, the way he described it, that he'd been in her office. But he was there with his wife, and I've interviewed Kinsella. And why would he actually have J.D. Salinger with him? But Veda Panikvar, as she talked to us, talked about the time that author and DJ Salinger, as she called him, came into my office. And, you know, it's just, she read the book so many times, and it just, I've seen this with so many things with that retroactive memory. And she was on the 100th anniversary of the actual playing appearance of Graham. She was at the Metrodome throwing out a first pitch, and that she had met J.D. Salinger. And respectable reporters who ought to be able to have a little, you know, that smells fishy thing were reporting this. So at any rate, it was an example to me how she reads the book where she is meeting J.D. Salinger that she thought that she had. And I enjoyed the movie. It bugged me that he had Joe Jackson batting right-handed, and when I interviewed him, Kinsella said, I didn't notice, I'm dyslexic. And or else it was just like, who cares? I don't, you know, it doesn't matter.
Well, of course, Kinsella wouldn't have had any choice on the movie, right? I mean,
In the correct, yeah. I'm sure he would have had this correct in the, in the book, but yeah, maybe I just asked him, what did you think of that, or something like that. To me, it bugged me. I've talked to others who say, who cares? To Kinsella, he just said, it didn't matter to me, and said, I'm dyslexic. Maybe I didn't even notice or something.
Yeah, that sounds like a well-rehearsed line.
You're right, because I don't think dyslexia works that way either.
Right. My guess is that, in my experiences, the baseball fans really thought it detracted from the movie. The non-baseball fans who watched it because it was a great soap opera sob story, they didn't care. But the baseball fans definitely did care.
Well, I'm glad, Jeff, you're the one who brought that up, and I'm going to keep it in mind that bringing James Earl Jones back and not mentioning Gibson or Charleston or anything like that was a missed opportunity, a great omission.
That's an
Glad
interesting
you pointed
comment.
that out.
That's a very good comment.
Well, I have some inside information. Maybe some people know it. Maybe it's wider than I thought. That James Earl Jones doesn't like baseball. Just that despite these starring roles in these iconic baseball movies, he really doesn't like baseball. And I first began to suspect that many years ago, and you could probably find it on the web, where Terry Gross of Fresh Air was interviewing him. And at some point, she asked him what his favorite baseball movie is. And if I remember correctly, he gives that big belly laugh and that distinctive voice he has, and he says, "I'm not going to tell you that." And she goes, "What? Why wouldn't you tell me who your favorite team?" He says, "I don't tell anybody that." And I thought, oh my God, this guy hates baseball. I have never met a baseball fan who, if you ask them what their favorite team is, they won't tell you their favorite team and tell you 100 reasons why it's their favorite team. And I'm sure that, I'm no different. And I thought that, but I didn't have any other evidence until years later we moved to Detroit. And I ran into someone who knew James Earl Jones, and he verified to me. He said, "Yeah, he's not a baseball fan. Doesn't care anything about baseball." Which really changes, if you know that, changes the way you read those scenes, the way you feel about those scenes, right?
Not really.
No?
No, I mean, James Earl Jones is awesome on
Oh, yeah,
whatever he's
absolutely.
in.
Absolutely.
And I guess knowing that, it doesn't really detract from it. Mentioning that a person who was real person who was portrayed and having a bat from the wrong side with Joe Jackson. In The Natural, I always saw the whammer as Babe Ruth, and that was Joe Don Baker, right? And he batted right-handed, and I just, even though it wasn't Babe Ruth, it was the whammer, I kind of wish they would have switched him around. And I don't know, can somebody who's not a natural left-handed hitter at least look somewhat realistic swinging that way?
I don't know, as somebody suggested earlier, they could hire a ball player and do a long shot.
Didn't they in Pride of the Yankees? Didn't they reverse?
Yeah, the
Gary
race versus
Cooper
uniform. Yeah,
but they reversed the shot that he was batting.
and they had to put the NY on the other side or something.
Because Gary was left-handed, right, and Gary Cooper was right-handed.
Yeah.
So he filmed the scenes right-handed, and they reversed the footage, and like you say, changed the uniform and everything.
At least they made the effort to do that.
Well, I agree with you that the whammer was Babe Ruth, but the whammer batting their own way didn't bother me. I would have been, well, of course, I hated the movie anyway, so what difference does it make? But it would have been just another reason to dislike the movie, to know that the guy who was giving this speech about the timelessness and the glory and the passion and the, how America is rooted in baseball and vice versa is, a guy who doesn't care at all about baseball. That's the essence of being an actor, right?
Yeah. He pulled it off.
He did. He pulled it off with, good writing and hokey directing. Yeah. So we seem to be dancing around Kevin Costner. Anyone want to opine about Kevin's other baseball movies? We mentioned a couple times.
Oh, I saw that on the flight to Japan. Kind of
For Love of the Game,
chick flick.
Love of the Game. I thought I kind of liked the Love of the Game, although it was somewhat choppy with all the one flashback after another, but I thought it was a nice movie.
It ended like Major Leagues, where he got his wife back, right? With the Tom Berenger character, and they won the pennant or the division or something, and then there she is showing that she doesn't have a ring. But the part of For Love of the Game that I thought was the most realistic was the Yankee Stadium pitching against the Yankees, and there's this one younger fan just giving him crap the whole game, and then at the end, he's got it, and this fan finally has to clap his hands together. I got to give it to you, Chapin. Perfect game. And I thought that was so New York, that guy. All right, well, we'll salute you now. I've just been giving you shit the entire game, but I'll give it to you now that you did it. And Kevin
I-
Costner looked and act like a ball player in Bull Durham, and as I recall in For Love of the Game, he looked like a pitcher, but he had some baseball skills as a catcher, as a hitter. I thought he did as well as anybody in portraying the star of a baseball movie.
I'll see, I thought he was pretty good as Crash Davis. I didn't think he was so effective in the movie. I don't even remember his character in For Love of the
Billy
Game.
Chapin.
Yeah. So anyway, so back to Bang the Drum Slowly. Jeff, there was never any anything made of any of the other three books, right?
I don't believe so. Not that I've seen.
Right.
Stitches for a Seamstress.
Ticket for a Seamstitch.
They're yours to produce, Gary.
Yeah, right. I was looking tonight. The interesting thing about It Looked Like Forever is that it was published 23 years after Ticket for a Seamstitch, and 26 years after the Southpaw.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's a big gap.
The other thing that's interesting about it is the first three books come out a year after the stories are supposed to have happened, right? Like it was the 55 season that was written in a book that came out in 56. And It Looked Like Forever was set in, I think, 1971 or 1972, which makes sense based on when Henry Wiggen's career begins in the books, but it comes out, what, 78 or 79?
79, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know if it was like a late burst of creativity by Mark Harris or how that came about.
Or he needed money. But
sure. Although I think that's the one. I think that's the one. If you were to take another of these four books and make a movie, that's the one that I think, or a short streaming platform series.
What other book did Harris write on baseball? Forever?
It's 1979 book. It Looked Like Forever. Is that right? Or It Seemed Like Forever?
Looked Like Forever, yeah. And so the story is, Wiggen is at the end of his career. Dutch dies. Wiggen thinks he's going to be named the manager. He is not. He tries to resurrect his career as a relief pitcher for another team. And he has to kind of cajole his way to get a chance for that. And so, it's a little bit, I think, like the John Updike Rabbit series, where he's now in middle age and his prime is behind him, and he's struggling with that.
Yeah, I'll read you the summary from Andy McHugh's book, which I will hold up. You're not going to get it. Right?
By the way, Gary, thank you for the citation. I multitask and I just ordered it for $8.03, including shipping from Abe Books.
Okay.
So thank you for that.
Anyway, It Looked Like Forever. 247 victories after the beginning, Henry is released. He tries broadcasting Friday Night Baseball. Nice touch. That's my editorial comment, sorry. And coming back as a reliever for another team. He can still pitch a bit, but he can't field. I thought It Looked Like Forever was a terrific book. That I thought it sagged a lot in the middle, but at the end I thought it really closed effectively, and also closed the 4-book series very effectively. And I do think that would make a good movie now that you mention it. So,
can you string the 4 books into some type of series as opposed to picking one?
well, there's a Netflix series, right? If Netflix cared about baseball, or maybe Apple Plus. I don't watch Apple Plus, or maybe Amazon Prime. Amazon Prime will make anything into a series.
You mentioned movies, and I didn't see Angels in the Outfield. I've seen bits and pieces of Little Big League because it's shown around here so much because they did it, and I think it's awful. I have MLB Network on because I had it on for the Hall of Fame announcement, and now they're just starting the movie The Rookie, and nobody mentioned that. Is that the one about that pitcher for Tampa Bay?
He was a high school coach, and
okay, so that's kind of a true story.
I did like that one.
Yeah, I was going to mention that book. I think it's a pretty good movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think it's a good story. I saw it and I can't remember what his name, Jim something. I saw
Jim
him pitch for
Morris,
Tampa
right?
Bay, Jim Morris. And then hearing his story of his high school team telling him, you're telling us to live our dreams. Why don't you do this? And then it worked. So
Right.
I guess I've just never happened to see it. It's on MLB Network. If I want to get it, I'll watch it
Yeah, then
somewhere
he,
else.
when he makes the majors, I think he's calling home, coaching his daughter through algebra or something, right? Because he's the old guy with grown kids, and it's kind of touching.
No, I mean, it's a great story. So I
Yeah.
suppose if you could, you at least got a jump on making a good movie out of it.
Well, if I remember correctly, it's possible I'm wrong. He got a tryout because as a high school coach, he could throw 93 or 94. Whereas now, of course, that would be considered like, who cares? I got a
Yeah.
bullpen. I got 8 guys on my staff that can throw 95 plus, maybe 10, and I've got another 10 in AAA and AA. Who cares? But that got him a tryout.
Mm-hmm.
The game changes.
Oh, absolutely. Although I'd have to think back. I think the radar guns are still the same. There was a big discontinuity between the old ray gun, which was used in the 70s and 80s, and the jugs gun. By the time, let's see, Morris pitched in what, 99 and 2000 or something? Yeah, he pitched 21 games for Tampa Bay in 99 2000. By that time, I think everyone was using either the Stalker or the jugs guns, and they were pretty close. I used to like to amuse myself to sit behind home plate with the scouts back when I knew a lot of them, and watch all the radar guns take the same pitch and give different readings. Now, most of them, were only a mile different or 2 miles different, but occasionally get a clinker. So
There's a great scene in that movie where they're telling him he's really fast and he stops the truck at night and there's this speed sign and he throws the ball. And I don't know what it shows. It shows is it, I don't know, 60 something or whatever. But then he gets in his truck and he leaves and it shows that the lights are burnt out and he was really throwing 90.
Classic.
Yeah.
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 It's clearly Hollywood, but it was a good scene.
Yeah, I like that.
that was in the rookie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't remember that.
Yeah. I don't know if that really happened, but it was pretty
Right.
cool.
Well, I think he wrote a book on it. I mean, with the story he had, obviously somebody's going to work with him on a book, which is a little bit more reliable way to find out what happened.
But he made it his debut in Texas or something, and his whole town drove to the stadium, and that was actually pretty cool.
Well,
Yeah.
we can check that out.
Yeah, the book is called The Oldest Rookie.
Okay. Even though he might not really have been.
Right.
Yeah, that's okay. I mean,
Sad
I just
for
remember when he pitched and then I heard his story and it was an interesting story. I'm just watching, they're showing the oil rigs of like 1950s Texas or something down here, and I'm not going to stay up and watch this.
So, Jerry, are you the one said he made his debut in Texas? You're right.
Yeah.
September 18th, 1989, he pitched to one batter
Royce
in the
Clayton
in the 8th inning in Texas.
struck out Royce Clayton.
Wow, what does it say on a Wikipedia thing? I mean, what town from Texas was he from? I mean, I could see a lot of people. Of course, they don't know he's going to be in the game if you're a relief pitcher. You don't know if the guy's going to be in the game.
Yeah, they might have sensationalized that for television or for the movie, where his players drive up and part of his town, and you're right, maybe they didn't even know if he was gonna pitch.
Well, they could not know that he was going to pitch, but it looks like, I would say, he was put in to give the hometown or his hometown friends some excitement, because he came in with the Rangers ahead 6-1 with 2 outs in the bottom of the 8th. And Jeff Sparks, who had started the inning, had struck out the previous 2 batters. So there'd be no reason to put Morris in 2 outs in the 2 outs in the bottom of the 8th, and you're losing 6-1. There's no and your pitcher has just pitched to 3 batters and struck out the last 2. So it was obvious. It seems obvious to me he was put in for the fans' sake.
Rothschilds did just a nice deed if he knew that there was a lot of some of his fans there. Just as a nice deed, put him.
Yeah, he's also was a left-handed pitcher, and Royce Clayton was a righty, so that doesn't make sense, right?
Is that kind of like putting Miguel Cabrera at first base in the last game?
Oh, right. But
They hit it to him. That was scripted perfectly.
That was unbelievable.
Now, if I can throw this at the other end of a person's career, it came up at our meeting. Brooks Robinson died, and he announced his retirement when they were in Minnesota, and he was still an active player on the team, and came out, and the Minnesota fans gave him this great ovation. But I was looking, did he play in that series? I was out of town that weekend. Well, he hadn't played in actually in a game in about 2 weeks where he actually did anything, but his final appearance was August 13th, 1977, and Baltimore was losing to somebody 9-6. And with 2 out in the 9th, he was put into the game as a pinch hitter, and then he was pinch hit 4. So he was his final appearance in the major leagues. He was announced as a pinch hitter. So he must have had nothing left when he really let him go hit.
Where was that game? Was that a away game?
Yeah, it was in Baltimore. They lost to somebody 9-6, and I just looked it up on Retro Sheet, but it was so 2 out in the 9th, and I guess they sent him out to hit so he could get a big ovation. And his last appearance was a week before that, where he did pinch hit. He actually got an at bat, but it was is a going for a tribute, of course, and he sent him out, get his ovation, and then have somebody pinch hit for him. I don't know if that would almost be kind of demeaning or something. But I'd say good for Larry Rothschilds. I think it would have been at the Tampa Bay manager to, hey, you got friends in the stands. This is a cool story. We're getting kicked. Let's throw you in there for a batter. I think that's kind of nice.
I went back after the Cabrera stuff and looked up Al Kaline, and his last game in Detroit, I think might have been, I don't know if it was a day game, but there were only 4,000 or 5,000 people there in his last game.
Well, people didn't do things. That was before stuff was an event.
Yes.
When stuff became it's an event, I've got to go there so I can say I was there. I mean, whether it was the last game at the Polo Grounds or many other places, Crossley, Forbes, the Met Stadium, I was there. The people who this really meant a lot to, but as opposed to, oh, this is the thing to do. And did Kaline end at 3,001 hits? He ended at 399 home runs, and I think he was 3,001. So he just crawled over
3,007, I think.
7, yeah.
3,000. You're right. Okay, so and it wasn't like it came down to the final game, and he never did get that 400th home run. But
right, but now no player of Kaline's stature, I think, would retire with 399 home runs.
Yeah,
Fred McGriff retired at 497. I mean, the 500 is a bigger milestone, and he was 3 away. A-Rod retired 4 short of 700. But
I heard Kaline talk
have a
about
choice?
that when he was a broadcaster, and he claimed, and I don't know if this is really true, but he said this on television, that he was not aware either that he was 1 home run short, or the fact that he would have gone into an elite club of people with 400 home runs and 3,000 hits. It just wasn't that big of a deal. He also claimed or said that he had hit home runs in games that were rainouts. So he really hit, more than that, but that's baseball too.
I'm compiling erased performance list, and Retro Sheet has a nice one on the lost home runs. That Maris and Mantle in 1961 in their great home run race, even lost home runs to rainouts, which is, you know, I mean, that probably a lot of those. I could look and see how many K-line lost that way.
In his career, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, that's on a retro sheet site if you
really.
want to. I'll look while we're talking. And although there's a thing in Detroit, I don't remember if Gary, were you in Detroit in 2002?
No, I was in North Carolina.
Okay. And I've always felt sorry for Mike Ryan of the Twins. His debut was in Detroit Sunday in September. And he led off the game and got a hit, and the Twins scored 9 runs in the inning. He came to bat in the same inning, got another hit, first time that ever happened. And the game was rained out before it became official. So that's as it is at least barely mentioned in the Minneapolis paper because I went back and looked. I hope this guy at least has a clipping that he's laminated to carry around to people so they don't think he's a totally crazy old man when he tells them this. But yeah, it's
Well, just to go back to K-line a second, I think K-line was in a different category than McGriff because McGriff had played on like 6 teams in the majors
yes.
and wasn't really an icon anywhere. Although I think he was well liked everywhere, whereas K-line was Mr. Baseball in Detroit. And so I think there's a difference. And obviously K-line was a first ballot Hall of Famer, whereas McGriff took how many years? 15 years? Yeah, a lot.
But you know, those 3 home runs, getting to 500 without having a steroid stigma, that, you know, that could have done it. By the way, K-line had 2 washed out from 1958. And then on the retro sheet site, it mentions another one in 63. And on this one, it says, it references the 1958 one and said, like the one he lost in 58, this one could have given him 400 for his career. So he had 2 wiped out. Harold Baines, if you bring him up, he was still over 100 hits away from 3,000. That's a Magic Hall of Fame number 2. But he had quite a ways to go. And then there was Sam Rice way back when at 2993 hits or something like that. But that was definitely back in who cares? I mean, big deal.
Right. Then you have to look and see, okay, in the makeup game, did he hit one? Because you can't have them
Well, you're
both,
right.
right?
Yeah, I mean, with all of that, with Maris and Mantle
There
in
you go. That's a good
61, you'd
question.
have to find out when was this game replayed and did he
Right.
hit one there? And
He didn't say that part on TV.
no, and nor should he, but I hope he's not bitter about it. That's, you know, until 2020, they were wiping out games that didn't go 5 innings. And we even had one at the end of the season, this season, where there was an erased performance when Miami scored 2 in the top of the 9th to take the lead over the Mets, and it was stopped by rain. And because they couldn't resume it, they reverted back to the last full inning, which the last time they would have done that would have been in the 70s. It can still happen that there are erased performances, but they've pretty much eliminated them now with the rules.
Right. Back to the 400 home run, Dale Murphy didn't get there. And I watched him trying to get to 400. He was traded from Atlanta to Philadelphia in the second half of the 1990 season. And he was just hanging on then trying to get to 400. And in Philadelphia, the rest of 1990 and 91, he had 25 home runs in 220 games. No, 210 games, excuse me. And then so he needs 4 home runs to get to 400. He starts 92 with the Phillies. In 18 games, 62 at bats, he hits 2 home runs, but he's hitting $160, and he can barely run to first base. It was painful watching him run. So the Phillies either released him or traded him to Colorado. I don't remember which. In Colorado, they gave him 42 at bats. He hit no home runs, and that was the end of his career. So he ended up too short. And of course, everyone liked Murphy. He ended up too short, but he did try, and it was painful to watch. I mean, getting 4 home runs at the end of your career is really hard. I don't know, getting one home run is probably a lot easier because it's just one swing. Yeah, he was released by the Phillies.
If you can't hit a home run anymore, though, 1 or 4 is going to be tough.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, I did not see the movie, but wasn't there a movie where a hitter came back after retiring to try and get number 3000 because they changed the stats? Was it called Mr. 3000?
Not in real life, I don't.
No, not in real life. It was a movie.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there was a
That
movie,
sounds
Mr.
familiar.
There was a movie, Mr. 3000, but I don't remember. I never saw it.
Yeah.
Oh, and Mr. Baseball, nobody mentioned that.
I'm
Tom
sorry.
Selleck, and I'm glad nobody mentioned that. Yeah, Mr. 3000. It did happen to poor Grover Alexander that he retired thinking he was a National League leader in wins, and then in 1942. And I've never found exactly when or why they changed the 1902 pitching decision to Christy Mathewson, but now he was tied with Alexander again, and it was too late for Alexander to try to go back and get another win.
Didn't Early Wynn come back and pitch to make 300? I think that guy did
I
that.
think he was still going, and
Yeah, I think
so it's not like he had retired, but he was, and that was a painful sojourn for him. Did he finally get it with Cleveland? But he just didn't have anything left, and the only reason anybody would give him a chance was to
Get 300.
to get that. And I guess when you're only 1 win away, and as quirky as wins are, some guys throw 1 pitch in a game in relief and end up as the winner.
I think I've heard of guys coming back to get a couple more days to qualify for pension, but they don't play them.
Yeah, but in this case, there was a milestone that was still doable. And I think it still took a while. And he was trying to get it with the White Sox in about 63 and just couldn't get it. And then I guess was it Cleveland who, just for that reason, like, hey, this guy deserves to get his 300th win. Maybe that's what Colorado was doing with Dale Murphy. And
oh, I'm absolutely sure of it. Absolutely sure of it.
yeah,
The Phillies would have kept him around if they thought he could do it. But it was so painful to watch because I was there that time and sitting in the press box watching him. By the way, I have to read you Mr. 3000 on IMDb. The tagline is he's putting the eye back in team.
that's beautiful.
Isn't that a great line? He's putting the eye back in team.
Was it Wesley Snipes or somebody?
Is what?
Wesley Snipes, was he
That
the
sounds right.
No, Bernie Mac. Bernie Mac.
Oh, okay.
Oh, now that's hitting. Wesley Snipes, in Major League, of course, these are all actors, and they made him Willie Mays Hayes. Hayes, you may run like Hayes, but you hit like shit. But I read that he was, even out of the actors there, he was one of the slowest people.
I didn't know.
Well,
So-
somebody wrote a book on the making of Major League. The movie came out when this guy was 16, and he watched it every day for 2 years.
Oh my God.
And then I was on the Seymour committee one year, and that got nominated. I got 40 books to go through, and it was kind of a fun book, but it had that Wesley Snipes was just, even among the actors in that movie, the slowest one.
Okay. It is 9:24. We've strayed far afield, but it's been an enjoyable conversation. So I'm going to say we should wrap it up. Jeff, you want to make some final comments?
No, I think it's been a great conversation. I guess the only thing we didn't really talk about that was on my list was the song "The Streets of Laredo," which the title of the story comes from, and obviously the scene where Piney Woods sings the song. If you're not familiar, and I was surprised Gary was not familiar with it.
I was not.
It is one of the classic sort of Western Americana songs. The Western Writers Association, or Western Music Writers Association, ranked it the number 4 Western song of all time.
Really?
And there are a number of covers from Willie Nelson to Marty Robbins to, pretty much anyone in serious country music has done that song. And
Wow.
so it's not just Piney Woods. But anyways, no, I really enjoyed this, and I hope we can do these again on Books and Movies.
Yeah, well, I'm disappointed in the turnout tonight, but this is December, and we can talk, Jeff, about whether we want to try to do the whole series of books, have another session. I mean, the conversation was great tonight, even though we had a light attendance. I learned a lot, and you're right, I didn't know anything about the streets of Laredo, and I guess it says something, especially considering I grew up maybe 12, 15 miles from where Zane Grey is buried, and actually know a fair amount about Zane Grey's career. He married a woman from Lackawaxen, Pennsylvania, near Bumpkinville, where I grew up in northeastern Pennsylvania. And I learned a fair amount, and including that I'm older than I think, given that nobody mentioned Field of Dreams or The Natural. But I thank you all for coming and participating. If anyone has any questions for anybody who's on the chat, you can find probably most of us in the SABR directory. If not, I think I know how to reach everybody else. Send me a question, I'll forward it to the right person. And we'll look forward to talking to you again sometime next year.
Gary,
Yo,
I'm sorry, I just looked on the chat and I saw that you had asked me. I didn't look at the chat for quite a while. And I see you asked me for the citation of the baseball book I referred to.
yes.
Would you like for me to do that now or say it?
Yeah, yeah, you can give it orally or you can put it in the chat, either one.
Okay, well, if it's all right, I'll just read it out rather carefully.
Yep, go ahead.
Okay. The name of the book is Baseball in the Movies, a comprehensive reference, 1915-1991. And the author is Hal Erickson, Erickson.
That sounds
Okay.
like another good one to get. And
It was published.
Was it Edelstein? I'm sorry, Edelstein, who recently died, was our SABR expert on.
Yes.
Film.
And this was Hal Erickson, and the book was published in 1992 by McFarland, actually. McFarland and Company.
Can you hold it up, Francis?
Yes, okay. And it did not have a book cover.
No, that's a McFarland book.
Yeah.
But it's
okay.
I think it's a very good summary of a whole slew of movies.
Okay, well, I believe I don't think the count's going to shut us off, but we're out of time. Again, thanks everybody. Thanks, Jeff, for suggesting
Thank
this.
You for doing this, Jeff and Gary.
We'll talk at some other book discussion next year. Okay.
All right. Have a nice holiday, everybody.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you.